Hello, everybody. Welcome to Good Tech, an ongoing discussion around ethics and technology. I'm Elizabeth Perry with Idka. We've all heard of the Cambridge Analytica Scandal, and many of you have seen the Netflix documentary, The Great Hack. If you haven't, it's worth a watch. The Great Hack uncovers the dark world of data exploitation, following the personal journeys of key players on different sides of that scandal, where 50 million Facebook users' information was compromised. We're going to talk about that today. But today we're going to meet one of the key players in that film, vital in uncovering one of the most important stories in tech around the use of and misuse of data. Please welcome data expert and activist, mathematician and entrepreneur, Paul-Olivier Dehaye. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. You're a busy man, so I really appreciate your time, and it's an honor to have you with us.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
All right, so you and I met at the My Data conference in Helsinki in late September, during which we saw a screening of The Great Hack, and we'll get to that. But first, I want to talk about you and your journey because it's fascinating. What led you to now? You're a mathematician. Is math at the heart of your story?
It took me a while to realize that it wasn't quite math that was at the heart of my own story, as you say, but it was more secrets. It was more the ability to keep secrets, which is what originally attracted me to math and cryptography. But actually, I have a deeper interest, and it took me a while to realize it was deeper into the flow of information and managing information flows in general.
So, and you became interested in data. Tell us how you became interested in data, because that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah, so it grew over time. It grew from working on my PhD in Silicon Valley between 2001 and 2006, and realizing progressively the tools that were being built around me and the dynamics that changed, the social dynamics that changed as a consequence. So that was progressive, and then there was the Snowden affair that sort of revealed on a large scale what government surveillance could be, but there was a lack of awareness of what corporate surveillance might be, and so that became sort of a very important thing for me. And then one day I had read a lot about all those things, and then one day I saw something about Cambridge Analytica in a newspaper, so in December 2015. And I thought that this was actually a really good opportunity to reach a much larger number of people around those topics. That turns out to have been true.
And so Cambridge Analytica is kind of the focus of today, but there were other times when you were involved with data protection and you've taken on other companies, besides Cambridge Analytica. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What happened?
Yeah, so as I was getting I was getting unpleasant feelings about corporate surveillance, about all this data being vacuumed by private companies. And at some point, so I was assistant professor in math at the University of Zurich. At some point, my profession sort of collided with those concerns or this weird hobby. And that was when online courses arrived to higher education. So that was around 2013, let's say, 2012, 2013. And I was kind of shocked at the lack of foresight of my colleagues, the lack of knowledge of what was happening in the gig economy, in the online economy, sorry, and the lack of foresight of what could happen if professors started to teach on online platforms with no accountability, but with intermediaries that they didn't fully understand. And so I started talking to my colleagues and tell them, look, we should be paying attention to this. And it turns out no one was really interested at the time. So eventually I did, I did something unexpected, but I decided to offer a course on one of those platforms about those platforms' data practices and business models, which was kind of a big move and a big unexpected move, and certainly a challenge to this teaching platform. And it turned out not to work out very well for me, but it gave me a clean break to leave academia and to start working more fully on these topics. And then I started exploring what I could do in that space, what individual rights meant, anticipated the GDPR, the arrival of the European Data Protection Law, and started building up a strategy around individuals exercising their rights more deeply. And I started practicing myself what that strategy might be. So yes, I took on a lot of different companies. Some you have never heard of, but are worth tens of billions of dollars. And some you have obviously heard about, like Facebook or Tinder, for instance.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's fascinating what you've done with this, and it's sort of a. Did you feel like it was a risk at all? I mean, were you ever concerned about your safety taking on big companies like this?
So there was a risk when I did this online course. This risk completely materialized to my career. So my career just blew up. Partly because I was unwilling to compromise and I was ready to blow up my career to do this because I thought it was more important. But I think your question hints at like physical risk. And I learned a lot from that experience with this online platform and how to build coalitions and how to be strategic, how to take calculated risks and how to take them together. So I've actually been quite a coward in covering all that stuff about Cambridge Analytica because I only worked with other people and I was encouraging others to move forward, to be the face, if you want. And I was staying more in the shadows. So, for instance, journalists, but it's part of their job, and normally they should have structures supporting them when they do that. But in some cases, it was really. I really didn't want to be in the forefront. I really didn't want to have my name on articles or something because legal threats were coming in from billionaires, and that's no fun. That's no fun to deal with, as some journalists now have to deal with.
Right. So let's get into the description of the Great Hack, and you can find it on www.thegreathack.com. Starts by stating that data is now more valuable than oil. And it says, quote, "People everywhere are in a battle for control of our most intimate personal details." So the film, The Great Hack, forces us to question the origin of the information we consume daily. What do we give up when we tap the phone or the keyboard and share ourselves in the digital age? The Cambridge Analytica Scandal, which the documentary is based on, is one of the most talked about stories in tech. Your involvement was critical to exposing what happened there. What is so important about this story? Now, that's a big question, but what is so important about the Cambridge Analytica story and the Great Hack?
Well, it's a big question, but it's a good question because it forces us to summarize a very complex scandal into just a few sentences. So privacy was thought as a purely individual matter. It concerned the individual, and in our Western democracies, it's up to the individuals to decide what they share or what they don't share. What the Cambridge Analytica scandal has shown is that it goes beyond that. It goes into a question of power and who should have power over entire populations. And that shifts the question from a question about autonomy, about how much, if you expose yourself, if you give up your privacy, how much autonomy do you lose? And it goes into if governments don't protect data of their citizens, how much does that affect their sovereignty? And that changes a huge amount of the dynamics of fixing the problem. It changes the responsibility. It's no longer, it's the same shift as, taking care of the health of your kids or your kids going to a school where all the other kids are not vaccinated. It changes it really changes the dynamics of obligations and positive obligations on people and on the state to protect others.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's a great answer. I think that's the most succinct answer to why it is so important. Now, what was your involvement in this movie, and sort of the uncovering? What was your involvement exactly?
So it's a bit weird because there's two completely separate strands of involvement for me. And I feel there is some lost in not recognizing that there's two strands, because there are two logics. And I was willing to follow both logics, but they bring different things each. So one logic is journalistic, purely classical journalist. And my role is unusual in that I was acting as a citizen journalist. I wasn't a formal journalist, but I was a concerned citizen who started investigating this company I had read about. I felt like I had more background than the average person, even maybe that the journalist who had written the original story about it. And I wanted to dig deeper, and I was surprised no one was following up. So I took it upon myself to do that. And I started investigating based on open sources, based on freedom of information requests. And then, to get more reach, started working with journalists and expanding on the investigation and then publishing. And there was another element there, is that this is a very international story. And I was the researcher helping the journalist, but the researcher who was not bound by in which language I was publishing, to which audience, or anything like it. I was able to just hop around and help literally hundreds of journalists in covering this story and making sure every single nook was uncovered for the right audience in the right language. That was my first involvement. My second involvement derives from the first, but comes from a very different logic. It's the fact that throughout, the journalists were all asking me the same thing as a mathematician: do you think this was effective or not? Right? Do you think those techniques were effective or not? And that's obviously an excellent question. And my answer was to them always, this is impossible to assess from the outside, because you will never be able to factor in the influence that those platforms' algorithms have over the spread of information. So beyond what Cambridge Analytica did, beyond or didn't do, beyond what Trump did or didn't do, beyond what how Brexit players were playing along, beyond what Russians might have done, what you don't know is what feedback mechanisms Facebook had. And all the indications are that those feedback mechanisms had an enormous impact. So you can't assess that from the outside unless, and this is the second logic, unless you have informed citizens who actually go and dig for this data, go and get this data using their individual rights, using their own assessment of what is worth doing or not, and bypassing any obligation for researchers to get consent from individuals, because they are the individuals and they can make their own decisions. So I was telling them, look, this is the way we should do it. This is the way we should push for more transparency, and we have the legal rights to do it because of the situation. That's what appealed to me originally, is that there were 300 million Americans who were profiled in the UK under a law that allowed this uncovering, if you want. Mm-hmm. And the journalists were telling me, no, we don't want to do that, because then it will jeopardize our classic investigation, right? So as soon as it was published in Switzerland in German, December 3rd, 2016, 2 days later, I started filing requests myself for access to specific data points that Facebook had, that I was entitled to. And I started digging for this to uncover what I thought were essential data points to better understand how information flowed to me, with the perspective that anyone could do this, and anyone affected. So I also thought, well, this could be done for Cambridge Analytica as well, but I wasn't affected because I wasn't in the UK and I wasn't in the US. So what I should do is to find people who are willing to engage into this. And so that's a very different logic, starting from the individual, not starting from the top with journalists. So I reached out to 15 different people from civil society. So it would be academics, educators, journalists, and so on, and told them about their rights, told them about the situation, and helped them how to do such requests to Cambridge Analytica. I even paid myself for that, because at the time you had to pay, but now it's free under the GDPR.
Mm-hmm.
And David Carroll was one of those, and the one that was best connected, felt safest, found the quickest path to getting money to help for his legal case, or to ensure that he was safe from a legal standpoint, that he wouldn't have to pay for the other side, or that he would be covered for paying for the other side. And he actually brought this case all the way. So from there, he just took it up upon himself and pushed it. And the great hack follows. Part of the great hack is following him, doing those efforts.
Right.
It's a long answer. It's a long answer, but I think it's very important to clarify that there are really two strands here.
No, and this is something that is, thank you for clarifying that, because I mean, first of all, it makes it clear how important your role was, because you were really kind of playing two roles. You were playing, well, three maybe, the mathematician who knew what he was talking about, kind of a journalistic role, and then sort of a
more activist.
An activist, saying to people, these are your rights, and this is what you need, this is what you can do.
And we're still, I think it's important to clarify that now, because the second logic is still there. I mean, and we have seen that the first logic has sort of failed, that we still don't know what happened, despite all the investigation, despite the great journalism that happened. We still don't have all the evidence we need, and it's still being contested by platforms in all kinds of ways that they had an influence. And even worse, the platforms are saying, oh, we understood what we did wrong, now we'll fix it, trust us, which is absolutely not the way it should be, in my view. So that only increases the importance of the second strand, which is citizens actively participating in some of the citizen science movement in better understanding how those platforms work and how information flows to them.
I mean, what should be done? I mean, if it hasn't been done yet, what's the next step?
Well, to me, what I would like to happen is to see a community of people who are empowered around their data, so who don't fear personal data, who feel like they understand their rights and want to feel free to exercise them and feel strong as a community, who start to actively exercise their rights with respect to platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and so on, to not reverse engineer, but better understand how information flows to them and what is reliable and what is not. I absolutely don't believe this statement that users will never be interested in this. I don't think so. I don't think we're all the same, and I don't think that people are stupid either. Some people understand very much what greed is, what a drive towards profit is, and how it might allow some to take corners. Some other are able to translate those principles into technical principles, like how that might lead to some designs that are actually bad. Some others are able to jump from those bad design decisions to really question from a technical standpoint why you should build those systems this way, and so on and so on. And others are able to communicate to a wide audience about those topics. So by having a broad involvement around understanding the world around us, the digital world around us, I think we are capable as a society to take those giants to account. I mean, it sounds completely revolutionary, but it's only because we've been so stupid for the past few years. The proposal is only to have a scientific approach to this. That's it. To collect data, to assess it, to share it, to discuss it as a group of people, some more informed than others. And that's it. That's all it is. It's just that over the past 10 or 20 years, we've accepted some form of obscurantism from those platforms. We have accepted that they should operate above the law or outside of any realm of questioning. And I don't think that's true. I think we've seen how far that can lead in terms of concentration of power and unaccountability. And I think this is the moment to change it.
Well, I certainly hope you're right, because we're all in this. We're in the same camp. But let's talk a little bit about Carol Cadwallader. I always have a hard time knowing if that's correct
Cadwallader
way to pronounce. Yeah, Cadwallader. So people say Cadwallader, people say Cadwalla. I mean,
Yeah.
anyway, so she's very well known, and I apologize, Carol, in advance, because she's probably listening to this as we speak. She was featured in The Great Hack and has been instrumental in bringing to light what happened with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. She wrote a piece following the movie, and I'll quote her as she writes about you. She says Paul-Olivier Dehaye goes as far as to suggest that in investigating links between Trump and Russia, we're looking in the wrong place for evidence of collusion, and describes a scenario that is more subtle, delicate, and dangerous than any of those presently understood. Collusion, he says, may have been enabled by Facebook, its algorithms exploited by adversarial machine learning. A malevolent actor, he says, could, for example, create fake profiles of Hillary supporters, et cetera, et cetera. So you're talking about algorithms. And so what do you mean by that? Because I think, the general audience, even though they're more up to date on what's going on, doesn't really understand that.
Sure. So this is just speculation, right? But if I was in the position of those adversaries with quite a bit of money and some constraints on how overt I could influence things, this is essentially what I would do. Is I would seek. So first, you have to understand how Facebook operates. Let's focus on that platform only. Facebook is looking for signals to try to detect what people are interested in, and it's acting based on that to recommend content. So in a flood of content that might be public around you, that it could potentially show you, it's going to decide to show you a very, very tiny fraction. So how does it decide? So it's looking for signals. Now, of course, everyone knows this. So there's a whole bunch of people who try to game in some way or another to send the right signals to Facebook to get amplified. And of course, it's a race there to get the best signals, so you get promoted more by Facebook. If you are a state actor and you know all of this, then you can start acting in very subtle ways. And you can start doing all kinds of sock puppets accounts or fake accounts that start interacting with the platform. You can start to do things like, so also you're trying not to promote commercial content, but some political content that generate a huge amount of engagement. So you can start to understand this, which will get amplified even more by the platform. So you can try to understand what this engagement is like, and then progressively shift the algorithms towards shift what Facebook has learned towards things that benefit you, right? So what I can imagine happening, if the goal is to discourage some Clinton supporters to vote, to actually show up at the voting booth, is to look for specific types of commenters on Hillary Clinton posts. People who might be supportive, but at the same time critical of her stance on a particular issue, right? So they are supportive, but not fully committed because of a particular issue. Then you create a bunch of accounts that look like this based on what those people like, how these people interact. So you mimic them if you want. And you make all of those accounts follow specific pages that you control as well. Now, the result of all of this is that the recommendation systems of Facebook will encourage the actual voters that you're targeting to follow the pages you control, which might be specifically designed to split the electorate on those issues that are so controversial, even within the supporters of Hillary. Does that make sense? So you shift the conversation for a particular subset of supporters against her, and you leverage Facebook algorithms to get amplification.
Yeah, so Brittany Kaiser was calling this the persuadables. Is that what we're talking about?
So,
yeah.
Well, the persuadables would be, I mean, she knows better than me, of course, but I understand this to be people who are on the fence. I'm even talking about people who are mostly supportive of one candidate, but not completely like over the moon about them, right? So the easiest thing you can do there is to say, well, I will convince those people to actually not show up to vote because they are so unconvinced. So they would never imagine themselves voting for Trump, but they could imagine not voting for Clinton. Well, that's a win. That's still a one more vote, one vote denied to Clinton. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So it's still a big win. But you can find those people. You can find them, and you can find which issues they resonate with, and you can do. So when I was saying collusion, I meant that, well, this would be a way for a third party to help one candidate over the other, and to seed information into Facebook's databases that would actually go against one specific candidate and help the other. Mm-hmm. Right. So, and this is enabled by Facebook, but it's a form of collusion. Even if it doesn't involve direct discussions between the two, one benefits from the other's targeting and amplification.
Fascinating. It's so, and then I guess this same type of question, in the movie and just everywhere now, people are describing data as a military grade weapon being used to wage cultural warfare. Do you agree with that? And if so, how? If you don't, why?
So you're cutting off, but yes, I fully agree with it. Actually, when I read this article in December 2015 and I started investigating on Cambridge Analytica, this is one of the first things I found, is that Cambridge Analytica, the parent company, was SCL, which was a military contractor. And then very quickly, the whole thing unravels to see, like, what were they actually doing? What, position papers they've published or research papers they've published? What's the logic they will apply now? Instead of applying it to psyops and the military when invading a country, what is the logic they will apply to an electoral campaign? And the whole thing translated very well and was very, in the end, very, I wouldn't say scary because it's not the right word, but it gave you pause. It definitely gave you pause that suddenly those techniques were applied in Western democracies in an electoral context. Not to say that it was right to apply it, to invaded countries, that it was right to apply it before and it's wrong to apply it in Western democracies, but that's definitely something that led to pause. And that's actually what convinced journalists to start covering this story, despite Obama having used also social media data to get elected. It had a very different qualitative feel to it.
Yeah, so I'm going to skip over to a question that comes to me a lot because I'm a liberal and I'm not afraid to admit it. But there are a lot of conservative people in my midst. And they look at this movie as sort of, well, this is just a liberal vehicle. It's a political, the great hack, saying that Trump only got elected because of these bad actors or algorithms or Facebook, this and that. Is this a political issue, or are we talking about, what do you think about that? How do you address that question?
Well, I would definitely think it's a political issue in the sense it's a question about the distribution of power. But okay. People both left and right, Democrats and conservatives or whatever, they're stuck into their own way of splitting the political arena into two. And they should see right away that this is, well, not right away, but they should eventually see that this is a deeper issue. It's, as I said, it's an issue about their own capacity to define through the political process what should be the future of their country. It's a question of sovereignty. And we've basically ceded sovereignty over the the flow of political ideas, the flow of political information to possible foreign interference, as long as some multi-billionaires allow or care to care, So we've completely ceded that decision power away without thought. Another argument that I hear a lot, and I'm very sympathetic to it, is this scandal would have never been covered if Trump had lost. And that is actually not quite true, because it was decided to cover this, even though the first article was published December 3rd, 2016. So after the Trump election, this was just due to personal reasons. It was decided before to write it and everything. And then, baby arrived and then it was a bit delayed, and it changed as a consequence of the Trump election, but it was still going to be covered despite the Trump possibly losing. But it would certainly not have blown up as it has. It would have died immediately as one news item, never talked about again. So yes, it became the scandal it became because Trump won. That doesn't make it any less wrong what was done, and any less dangerous and any less problematic and so on. It only encourages us to look back at the Obama election and think, why did we miss in anticipating the risks? Why didn't we look at the risks? And I think that from that logic, from that questioning, we should just learn that when we see new technologies, we should not just have an optimistic look about them, but we should cherish those who have a critical eye and who try to anticipate where this might go. Because there were some people at the time that were very critical, myself included, of Obama needing to use those tools to get elected. And that's, maybe we should have listened more to those people at the time.
Do you think that this is a war going on? Little guys against big guys, or, big tech against little tech, or is there a war going on?
Some people talk about information warfare, and I'm quite sympathetic to people talking about it like that. It's a logic of nation states fighting for power. They don't necessarily kill people, but they confuse populations. They vie for power over the discussion. But this is the substrate for then fighting into more classical wars. So it's definitely part of warfare in general. I think it's fruitful to think about that as warfare. It might be that, it creates very tough questions of engagement. Like if you have an information warfare attack, do you respond with, missiles? Is that allowed or not? It's so that's very challenging. And if you say that it's war, it has consequences to how you can respond. So I'm not going to look at that. But if you say that it's war, to me here in Geneva, it begs asking the question, what about the civilians? What about the people who don't want to engage into that war and who are a victim because they are confused, because they're stressed, because they are lost, because they have cognitive load of trying to understand the world that suddenly disappears in front of them, or is so much more confusing, fake news, all that stuff. So what about civilians, and what should be done for them? In Geneva, there is the Red Cross. I mean, this is a question, this is the type of question that should be asked here, I think.
Yeah. Do you think this movie that came out, a lot of people watched it. I mean, it got great reviews. It's a beautiful movie. Do you think this will make a difference in the way people behave? Whether it's the civilians that, try to have a bigger voice, or whether it's big tech kind of getting regulated, or do you think this is going to make a difference?
If you just see it as a movie, I don't think it will have a lasting impact. Okay. If you see it like if you see it as a first learning object in the course of a series of learning activities, one after the other, where you get, you watch this movie and then you do something, and then you do something, and then you do something, and progressively you get more empowered around your data, then yes, I think it can have an impact. It's like the entrance of a funnel of more engagement around those topics. I was kind of joking for a while that what we need to happen is to switch to some kind of Netflix and David Carroll kind of thing, rather than Netflix and chill. So you have Netflix and chill. You watch a movie, and then things evolve from there. Well, this is kind of what's needed. It's like people watch the movie, and then out of this, maybe 100 David Carrolls emerge. and from there 1,000, and then 10,000. So this is the kind of thing that I would hope to see.
Yeah. We talk about data as the new oil, and back in 1911, Standard Oil was broken up because they had too much power. They were a monopoly or whatever. So is regulating this sort of industry, big tech, social media, Facebook, Google, is that the answer, or how do you see that playing out?
Maybe it's the answer, but I see softer, smarter intermediary steps to take. And I would like to try them first. So oil companies are dirty. It's a dirty business to produce oil, and people realize this, but it's not like there is an easy solution yet to switch to another energy source, right? For digital products, it's different. Ad tech is a fundamentally dirty business as well. It's very degrading to the people who get tracked and everything. It's fundamentally non-consensual, like despite all the proclamations that it is, it's really not. Most people who see their data are shocked at what's being done with it. But there are alternatives. What's missing is an ecosystem of business models and of financing and everything around the alternatives. But the switch can be very quick. Unlike switching on our entire energy grid, or cars, it's actually, we can switch digital services fairly quickly. And what's needed is a change of culture, of perception of surveillance-based services. But this is going to come as people realize.
So people, and isn't it? So a lot of people will argue, well, it's my business if I want to give away my data, so I'm going to continue to use these free services. I'm going to continue go ahead.
You can have both. You can not give away your data and have free services. That's the thing. It's not a given that you should pay. This is what the industry says, the ad tech industry.
How did they make money? Because don't they lose all their money if they're not tracking people and selling people's data?
Well, certainly the ad tech industry does, yes. So that's why they would say we are necessary for making the work. But I value then to make sure that you optimize for for an extra 0.2% on ads click through. That's a belief I have. I don't have evidence for it, but I just don't see that it's and like, if I look around me, I see a lot of companies that spend a huge amount of money on their brand and their image. Think of any clothing company or whatever. If ad tech is seen as a dirty business, those companies will be even more to engage with customers. That will be much more respectful of those customers' agency than ad tech is. So it's there's a lot of players in this, not just ad tech, but there's also the people who pay them, and those have a huge amount of decision power for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, Idka, I'll just put a little word in for a company I work with, Idka. It's not an ad tech model, it's a subscription-based model. And do you think there's a room for a subscription-based model? I mean, Slack's doing it. Why not social media with with a world that you can connect, share, and store all in one world, all in one place with a subscription?
Well, I mean, think about it. Does that sound like a good deal to you, to pay $10 a month and get tens of thousands of engineers from Silicon Valley working on building the best product for you to retain those $10 a month? Sounds like a good model that what people might be willing to pay for, right? I mean, they might not make as much money, but they're still talented, and it's just that they're applying their brain at other things. Right.
I just realized we're running out of time, but I want to hear about personaldata.io. Can you say a few words about that, and how should people find it, all that?
Sure. So personaldata.io is the nonprofit that I started based on all the ideas I've exposed today. The ideas have evolved, but it's really about building those coalitions around data champions like David Carroll. So people who really want to create change. I could try to create change through my own action, but that doesn't scale. So instead, I've focused on creating a lot of those cases and driving them forward in many different areas. So if that's something that's appealing to people, that is either as those data champions or as support for them, which requires a lot of different skills around them, legal, technical. Well, in the My Data community, we always talk about the BLTS sandwich. So you need that. You need business, legal, tech, society expertise, a broad array of skills. Then you can come to our forum, so forum.personaldata.io. And there we can start building this community of people to exercise our rights and to make those rights that are formal rights, to make them more actionable and eventually collectively useful. That's really the focus of personaldata.io.
Right. So it's www.personaldata.io.
Yes, or reach out to me on Twitter. And
yeah. So we have your Twitter handle up there on the screen. If you have any questions for Paul-Olivier about Idka, about personaldata.io, you can also find us on idka.com. It's free to set up a basic account, bring your people, your private groups and organizations. And any other sort of things you want to share with the audience today before we cut out? Or
no, I mean, I want to thank you for this vidcast. I enjoyed it, and I think we're all stronger together. So that's always what I'm striving for. One thing I like to say is that we should build meaning about our environment together. So we should try to understand it. We should have collective dynamics around understanding our digital environment, and that will definitely make us a lot stronger.
Yeah, and hopefully we can. Yeah, I mean, thank you, and hopefully we can bring the younger generation into this better world, because we kind of screwed up back there. At least we did. I mean, you didn't. But we did.
Well, this is the motivation for a lot of people of our age range that works on those issues. It's basically, we experienced the internet at first as a space of play and discovery, and a wonderful place of exploration. And this is partly how I personally grew up. I discovered the world through the internet before I traveled there. But yeah, it changed over time. It changed into a locked space that was driven by money, and that was a lot about surveillance. And well, like everyone, I want a better world for my kids, not a worse world, So that's the motivation for a lot of people in that space.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Paul-Olivier. It was really a pleasure having you on. And to our audience, have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Bye for now, and we'll see you again soon on the next Good Tech. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.